did not want to become Catholic at all. Hi, my name is Alexis. Welcome to Con Caretas, where we discover, defend, and live the Catholic faith. This is part 2 of part 3. And when I became atheist, I never had this moment of rebellion, the crazy, sex, drugs, rock and roll life. It was just never in me. It wasn't part of why I became atheist at all. That is thanks to the fact the way my parents raised me. I know there are many people who, after they've gone through this really, really strict way of life, they just, want to burst and do everything, anything and everything, and live kind of like St. Augustine, I guess. But that was never me. The most rebellious things I ever did were just, I would go out, watch plays, have dinner afterwards, and come home around midnight, 1 o'clock. I never went to clubs. I never did sex, drugs, rock and roll. So yeah, that was the most rebellious thing I ever did. I mean, I started to swear. When I was Mormon, I never swore, or really, really rarely became okay with lying. I was more accepting of other people's way of life, regardless whether or not I agreed on how they lived their life. I just figured, well, you live your life that way. As long as you don't impose your life on mine or other people, well, then you can live your life and I'll live my life and we'll be at peace. You know that bumper sticker, the coexist bumper sticker? It was kind of like that. Like, we can just live all together and everybody will be happy. But, and this is something that is very critical, and I hope more people understand leaving Mormonism. I was very, very critical of authority. It's funny because I get a lot of comments in that first video saying that I went from one cult to another cult, which is not the case at all. I was very, very careful whenever my husband, whenever Francois brought up Catholicism. I did not want to become Catholic at all. It was just not part of what I wanted to do of my life, and I thought atheism was the answer. So please keep that in mind. When you get out of a cult, although my experience, like I said, it was very good, but it was more the questioning, the questions that I wasn't allowed to really ask about the faith, about Mormonism. That's where the real problem was for me, and I think it is for many people. Luckily for me, I was never abused in any way while I was Mormon, but I know there are many people that have, and so please keep that in mind, that I wanted nothing to do with the Catholic Church because it was a figure of authority, and there was so much prejudice that I had, and all the lies that the world has created about the Catholic Church, well, I believed them. That's where I was when Francois brought this desire. And that's another thing that's great about Francois as well, is that he was also very critical of authority. But other than this aspect of being very skeptical and very critical of authority, Francois and I were just like any other couple. We lived our lives as if God wasn't there. We got married. We moved to France. We went to school. He went to university. Everything was the same. During Francois' final year of uni, he had to do a stage. I know there's a word in English. He was learning languages at the time, and he had a stage that had to do with translation, and the place where he had to do it was in a medieval history archive, something of that sort. They take medieval texts and they translate it from French to English, or English to French, or whatever other language, Italian, German. All the medieval texts mentioned Jesus or the Bible or a reference to the Bible, and he couldn't really get away from it. It was just in his face every time he went to his stage. And then he realizes whenever he read novels, particularly French before the 20th century, there was always mention of God, of Jesus, of the Bible. I thought, well, I really love reading, perhaps able to understand the novel or the time, the history. I should just read the Gospels. And that's what he did. Meanwhile, for me at the time, I was immersed in French architecture. Everywhere around me was living history, basically. So we lived in a city called Poitiers, and that's on the west side of France. And in Poitiers, there is a church from the 6th century that's still there. There's a cathedral, Cathédrale de Saint-Pierre. There's another church in the city center. I was basically surrounded by churches. Cathédrale de Saint-Pierre and the church in the city center were within walking distance from my apartment. And in general, France, living in France, especially the churches, always fascinated me. And I was always willing to go in a church despite being atheist. I always felt very calm, and I always felt very connected to the past, to its culture through the church. It was like a connection from one human being to another human being in the past. I think it's because it's the kind of beauty I never grew up with in Canada. Yes, we have churches in Canada, but not as old as the churches here in France. Not 6th century old. And like I said, I always felt at peace in the churches. And so did Francois. We loved visiting churches. Like I remember going in, I went to school in Montreal. And what we would do on our free time was we would go visit l'oratoire, the oratory in Montreal. One time we went out, it was -35. It was a weekend. We could have gone, I don't know, skiing or tubing or something. It was the middle of winter, or we could have just stayed home. But instead, we went to the oratory, -35. At the time, we were not thinking at all about God. I think it was like a year after. Yeah, so 2009, I became atheist. 2010, I went to school. So I don't know, divine providence, I'm sure. Yeah, so Francois and I didn't go to nightclubs. We just went to l'oratoire during our free time. And we loved it. It was just so fascinating and so beautiful. It's a little modern, but it's much more beautiful than many things in Canada, in everyday North America. So Francois read the Gospels, and the one thing that hit him was, before Abraham, I am. And for some reason, that one phrase it was just an epiphany happened, and he started to feel this urge. I don't remember exactly how to describe it, but he said that it was just something like a switch went on to the possibility of God, and I didn't know how to react when he said that. I was very confused. I was, like I said, I was very cautious. I took everything with a grain of salt. I waited a bit until he knew a little more to accept what it was. Fast forward, after uni, we went to Strasbourg. And in Strasbourg, there's this beautiful cathedral, like 1,000+ years old. And if ever you get the chance to go to Strasbourg, please go visit the cathedral. Something about this church, something about the environment. I also became friends with someone who was religious. Coucou Janine. She has a great fire for God, and it's really inspiring. She's not Catholic, but she's very proud that she's a Christian. Yeah, I think it's just the environment, this 1,000+ year old church, that kind of opened my heart to the idea of God again. Still very skeptical, because I thought, is it actually possible, even with all the suffering, for God to exist? Yeah, I don't know. I guess through God's grace, my heart opened to the idea of him. And I mean, I didn't think Catholic Church at the time. I that went over my head. I was not ready to talk about the Catholic Church, but I was open to the idea of God, if he does exist. What proof is there of his existence? And this is something critical. I hope the people that write to me telling me that I should read the Bible. I could not take the Bible as a document of authority. I was atheist. To me, it meant nothing. Now I understand that there are historical, archaeological evidence that prove that the Bible is a very reliable document that historians, any serious historian, takes. But at the time, I could not take the Bible as the word of, oh, God exists. Thank God that He has given us other ways for us to get to know Him through, His creation, through science, through art, through literature, through the lives of other people. The thing that Francois and I looked into in the beginning was near-death experiences. Many atheists might say that near-death experiences are just collective hallucinations. Well, the problem with that is that you can hallucinate, but you can't hallucinate the same thing collectively with different people from different parts of the world. The interesting thing about near-death experiences is that people have one of two stories. Either when they die, they see a light just filled with love, and this feeling of love that they've never felt before, and that this feeling that they never ever want to go back to earth or just go back, but they just this light full of love. Or they feel the opposite, this pain, this suffering, and it's such a misery that they've never experienced in this life. So yeah, heaven and hell, and every person that has a near-death experience has one of these two stories. Many people also come back, talk to their families about things that they should not know, that they couldn't have known. In near-death experiences, these people are pronounced dead. Their heart has stopped beating. But it was so fascinating to know that there were only two stories, and the things that they brought up to their families that they couldn't have ever known. In the end, these people would either become closer to Christ because of this experience, or it brings them to Christ because they want to avoid going to hell. And that's one of the first things I thought, well, okay, there could be a possibility. Another thing we started looking at was exorcisms. And I'm not talking about the exorcisms where after I tap you 5 times on the head with the Bible, you're foaming at the mouth cured. I'm talking about real exorcisms. The fascinating thing about exorcisms, not the actual process, but I'm talking about the people that get exorcisms. They're atheists, people from other religious backgrounds. When they've sourced every other source they could find to help them with whatever problem they have, or searched out every possible person that could help them, psychologists, doctors, etc. And when they come to the conclusion that perhaps it's a possession or something diabolical, maybe they can't explain why, but it's something that is spiritually bad, they go to Catholic priests, they go to the Catholic Church, they go to Catholic priests who do exorcisms, because there's no other religion that provides this. Exorcisms, to me at the time and now, show that there is an evil that exists that we cannot see, that is at work, and that is something that we have lost in the world. We have lost the understanding that there is evil out there. A lot of these other religions, and Christian ones including, are all about, yes, God exists, but they forget that the devil exists. They forget the influence of the adversary. And there are even Catholics that mock or laugh at the idea of an exorcist, but that really helped me understand, if there is evil, there has to be a God. Let me quickly talk about exorcism. When an exorcist gets a phone call from someone saying, oh, perhaps they're possessed or oppressed or obsessed, they take it with a grain of salt. There is a long line of questions that they go through. They don't just say, okay, I'm coming. No, they go through a certain questionnaire to make sure they rule out any psychological problems, physical. They look at their medical history. They have psychologists, therapists work on this person's case before they ever think about doing an exorcism. And it is only after the series of questions and evaluation that they eventually will do an exorcism, because exorcisms are not to be taken lightly. Like I said, it's not like I tap you on the head with the Bible 5 times and then you're foaming at the mouth cured. Exorcisms are done in Latin. Why? Because for some reason the devil and the demons hate it. Why? Because it's a sacred language. It's the sacred language of the church. In exorcisms, there are a set of prayers that are said, and the people that are involved helping the priest pray, what are they praying? They're praying the rosary. For some reason, demons, the devil, really hate the mention of Mary. Shocker, I know. People who've participated in helping a priest do exorcisms have explained that when they do exorcisms, they make sure that they are focused on the rosary, because at one point, if you drop your focus on the rosary, demons can attack you. They will attack you personally. And so you have to hold on to prayer. It is essential. The priest tells the demon or demons to name itself, to give its name. In the name of Jesus, tell me who you are. It's usually according to the sin that they're making the person do. This rosary is essential. And invoking heaven is essential. This is the thing that I find interesting too when Protestants say, why are you praying to saints and Mary? They're dead. They are not dead. They are alive. They are in heaven and they can intercede for us. Prayer is so essential, and prayer is going to go on even after death. And exorcisms can last several sessions, many sessions, because we live in this broken world, and a world that is largely devoid of God. I mean, can you imagine how much more powerful if all of us believe in Jesus and if all of us were Catholic to pray together? I just thought about this. Nuns and monks, especially, Carthusians, all their lives are just prayer. Without them, our world would be so much worse, would be far worse. So thank you, nuns, Carthusians, for praying for us. So exorcisms played a really big part. Here's another thing that helped me. My brother, when he was, I believe, 13, he went into this house, this empty house, supposedly haunted, with his friends, with a couple of friends, and they played with a Ouija board. He said this house was empty because they had gone around the house and there was no one there, and they started playing the Ouija board, and then they heard footsteps upstairs, and it was so freaky. There were a lot of things that happened. My brother's not religious at all, but to this day he will never ever touch or even think about getting near a Ouija board or anything of that sort. My younger sister, early teens, wanted to perhaps try the Ouija board, and my brother just snapped and said, no way you're touching this, because this is evil. You are going to play with the devil and you're not going to like it. People might say, well, that's anecdotal, but it doesn't make it untrue, And a conclusion I came to was, okay, Mormons practice Freemasonry. There are Satanists that practice Satanism. There are all these people children that get abducted, used for rituals. There's the Bohemian Grove. All of these evil things that I learned about when I was just atheist. And it started to make sense. If there is God, then there is the devil. And I should probably follow God. Marian apparitions. Francois started showing me Marian apparitions, and it's just another incredible way of learning about God, of learning that God exists. Fatima, Lourdes, Zaytun, Guadalupe, Akita. This is just incredible. I think I'm gonna do a video on Marian apparitions one day. I promise. There are all these Marian apparitions that are documented in secular newspapers, photographed in the 20th century as well, and testimonies from religious, Catholics, non-Catholics, atheists, Eucharistic miracles, the body, blood, soul, and divinity of Christ, bleeding, a host bleeding, incorruptible bodies, bodies of saints that never decay, that still smell of roses. I got to see Sainte Catherine Labouré. The Virgin Mary appeared to her and asked her to make the miraculous medal. I saw her, and this church was packed. It was Sunday, but I remember getting a closer look at her, and she was just so peaceful and just so beautiful. And I remember buying a rosary. I don't know why I bought a rosary, but I did. Hi guys, new day, same person. So the saints, there are so many saints in the church. Their lives are a testament. They are the witnesses to the truth, the beauty, and goodness of the church. And there are so many of them. Saint Maria Goretti, Saint Maximilian Kolbe, Saint Augustine, Saint Monica, his mom. One of my favorites is Saint Lawrence the Martyr. And I came to know Saint Lawrence when my husband and I went to our first Latin Mass, because the name of the church was St. Lawrence the Martyr. I had never heard of St. Lawrence before. We looked up who this person was, who St. Lawrence was, and basically whenever you see a statue or a photo of St. Lawrence, he's holding a grill, because the story is that at death, he was burned basically on a grill. When one of the sides were done, he basically just said, well, I'm done on this side, flip me over. I laughed so hard when I heard that story, when I read that story. Yeah, God has a great sense of humor. And I love that saints, their lives, they are normal human beings. They're not at all perfect. They're not saints in the way that many people would think a saint is, like super holy. I'm not saying that they're not holy. I'm just trying to say that they're not perfect. Their lives are just all dedicated to Christ, and they're so simple. They're complete opposites of what the world asks of us. So many of them are children, the poorest of the poor, people who that are in our world today wouldn't consider fit to be successful, to be interesting. Saint Maria Goretti, I mean, she was so young when she died. For those of you that don't know, Saint Maria Goretti, she was at home, I believe, by herself when her neighbor came over. It was a boy, a young boy, older than her, and basically made sexual advances to her, and she said, no, you don't want to do this. He got so frustrated at her that he stabbed her, I believe, 14 times. Instead of asking for vengeance against this boy, she prayed for him and told him that she forgave him. And even after her death, asked God, like, please God, I want to help get this soul back to you. And she appeared to him. Then he became a follower of Christ. And I find that so amazing that this little girl could do that. What I love about saints is just they're not perfect, like I said, but they surrender everything to God, to the will of God. And that is so hard to do, because we want to do what we want to do, and sometimes we want to do what we think is better than whatever God is going to give us, and it's hard to fight against that nature. Thinking of becoming Catholic, please go look into the lives of the saints, the Cristeros in Mexico. There is a film, and it's really well made too, but the lives of the Cristeros in Mexico, that was also great. What is his name? It's a Spanish name. I'm so sorry, guys. So young and so fervent in his belief in the Lord that he died for it. He died at 14. Saint Joan of Arc. There's so many. I could go on. But I'll make another video. Dogmas. People have a very negative view of dogmas with the word dogma. Dogma is not a bad word. And one reason why I'm Catholic is because there are dogmas. Things that never, ever change. Things that are always true. And there are so many not just Protestant denominations, but other religious denominations that change things. This will be good one day and the next day it's not. It's ever changing, and that's another reason why, when people were telling me that I went from one cult to another, no, I was so careful, because especially with denominations that change their rules every few years or so, every few hundred years or so, even less nowadays, it just keeps changing and changing. I was so careful. I urge all of you to go and read the church fathers. These were people who were really close to the apostles, if not like a person away from knowing the apostles. And the early church, they were trying to figure out, trying to make sure that everything was clear and that they were on the same page. God doesn't change. If it's wrong, it's wrong. If it's right, it will always be right. Protestantism, I remember, and it's really, really bad, when I was atheist. Francois and I used to live in Montreal. There was a Protestant evangelical church close by, and we just go in just to see and mock, basically. It was like a concert, and I never understood. I get that there's nothing wrong with doing that, but to me, I was so distracted. There were drums, there was a guitar, there was someone singing, there were lights, and I get that we want to sing praises to the Lord, but is that actual worship? To me, it looked like a concert. It didn't look anything like worship. There was no reverence. Another Protestant gathering, I went with my mother, and she had a friend who was a minister, and the minister was a woman, and for some reason I couldn't take it seriously. It was in the basement of a building in Toronto somewhere. There were drums and, like I said, electric guitars and everything like that. There's always a train. But I couldn't take it seriously, because to me it looked like a rock concert. I can't be Protestant because there is no authority but my authority. Let me explain. Many Protestants have told me that all I need is Jesus, and that's all. And as long as I believe in Jesus, then I'll be saved. But that's not true. And it's in the Bible. And I made a video about this. You need more than just believing in Jesus. There are works that you have to do. Otherwise, it would be so easy. The most evil person in the world could just believe in Jesus, and then that's it. They get into heaven. And I couldn't become Protestant because every Protestant denomination was created by a man. The Catholic Church, Jesus, God's Son, God Himself, put it together on this earth. There's this thing with Protestantism that you go where you feel like going, except unless that's the Catholic Church. You go where you feel like the Spirit tells you to. The truth concerns me more than my feelings. The truth is what's most important. And though the Catholic Church in the beginning was a little difficult for me to accept as the church, I couldn't help but follow the truth. Regardless of my feelings, the truth sent me to the Catholic Church. I would never, and I didn't, and I still don't want a God that would form Himself, His beliefs to my beliefs. I don't want to believe in God just so I can be my God. I can feel the way I feel. I can do the things I want, and it would be okay. I didn't want God to mold into who I am, because that doesn't make sense, and I might as well just be atheist. Some Protestant denominations accept divorce. Some accept gay marriage. Some accept women bishops, women priests. It wasn't like that at all in the beginning. It changed thanks to Martin Luther, that was the trigger. I get comments all the time saying, oh, just read the New Testament, read the New Testament. Yes, read the New Testament, but you got to read the Old Testament too. And in the Old Testament, God was so specific on how he wants to be worshipped. And he didn't just all of a sudden change his mind. Christianity, Catholicism is fulfilled Judaism. Another thing, yes, Jesus hung out with the worst of the worst people, but did he say that they should stay that way? No. He asked them to be like him, and that's why I would never want to go to a church that just makes me feel good for how I am at this moment. I want to get better. I want to be just like him. If the church says, don't worry, you're okay, you're perfect just the way you are, that's not true, because perfection is God. Only God can be perfect. We are all sinners, and the Catholic Church is the church for sinners. For those who are against the Pope is biblical. It is biblical. It is in the New Testament. In the Acts of the Apostles, the first thing they do is replace Judas. And they didn't replace him with any random man or woman. They elected Matthias. Peter's name is always mentioned first and foremost before all the other apostles. Always. God, like I said, is so specific in the Old Testament on how he wants to be worshipped. There's no way that he just threw it all away and said, okay, worship as you see fit. Otherwise, there wouldn't be all these councils, like the Council of Nicaea, Council of Trent, even just these letters, these apostolic fathers' letters to the Corinthians, to all these different kinds of people, because there was and there is a visible church today that Jesus himself established. And to keep his teachings and the things he wanted in place, you have to have some sort of authority. Even if you go to a non-denominational service, whatever that means, there's still the pastor whose authority you listen to, or the female bishop who gives you the Eucharist, which is not really the Eucharist, but you know what I mean. We take authority on so many things in our lives, but we just want to do away with it with this one thing. Jesus chose Peter, and I know, super horrible sinner, Peter, but he chose him to be the head of the church. There is apostolic succession in the church. It's from the beginning, and it makes complete sense that God, and he promised that he would never leave us, that his church will always be here. Despite the bad press, she still stands. She might be in a really difficult situation at the moment. It's not very good in the church at the moment, but she still stands, and what she teaches is still true. The Eucharist is biblical. I made a video about this. It is there. Jesus switches from one word to another. In English, it says, eat my flesh, drink my blood. But in the original text, it's eat my flesh and then chew on my flesh. I also thought that if God applies to everybody, then certainly his church also applies to everybody. The church, the Catholic Church, she has not only evangelized the whole world, but she is universal. If you look at the church today, some of its most fervent, a lot of its most fervent believers are not in the Western world. They're in places like Africa, Asia, and that just shows that it is universal. It's not like Mormonism. It's not like Baptists. It's not like evangelical Protestants. It's not like Hinduism Buddhism. Catholicism applies to everybody, and that is one of its greatest beauties. No matter where you are, where you're from, who brought you up, how poor you are, how rich you are welcome. Quick thought on bad priests, bad nuns. Like I said, Peter was horrible, denied Jesus 3 times after all the miracles he showed. Like I said, we're humans. We never learn sometimes. Jesus also picked Judas. And Judas betrayed Jesus. He handed him over. And so, for those of you that may be asking, like, why are you becoming Catholic? Or why are you Catholic? It's so corrupt. No, the church is not corrupt. There are people who are corrupt. Her teachings have always stayed the same. The dogmas stay dogmas. The doctrines stay doctrines. It doesn't change, despite having bad popes, bad nuns, bad priests. If I were to take that logic to leave the church because of bad people, then I might as well not believe in Jesus Christ, because he picked bad people. He picked men, human beings that are prone to sin. And the church, the institution, is not devoid of that, because we are human beings and we have the free will to do what we want. Take, for example, educational institutions, schools. I'm sure you have, as I have, experienced horrible teachers who don't know what they're doing, who don't care about their students, who are just plain awful teachers. But in school, the majority of the teachers are very good, or at least decent. But just because teachers are bad doesn't necessarily make the educational institutions bad. It doesn't necessarily make school bad. And that's what I mean when it comes to the church. Just because there are bad popes, bad priests, bad nuns, doesn't make the church bad. We are human beings and we will sin. And just like you and me, popes, nuns, priests, they are all human beings. And whether or not they follow the church teachings is up to them. They have their own free will, but the church will always stand for Christ's teachings. I guess because the church teaches morality, but it doesn't matter. The church teaches what it teaches, but then it is up to us to do as we should. And this is not to excuse any priest or nun. I'm just saying we have free will, and Jesus chose Peter and Judas, and they both had free will, and they chose to do what they chose to do despite having the teaching right there with them. Another reason why I can't be Protestant is the Bible. The Bible is a Catholic book. The Bible is a Catholic book. Let me repeat that one more time. The Bible is a Catholic book. The Catholic Church put the Bible together, and the Catholic Church evangelized pre-Bible times, pre-printed Bible times, thanks to all its images and statues and oral tradition that continues. And that's the church. Okay, it is a 3-legged stool, and if you take one away, then that stool will not stand. It will fall. Like I said in my images video, please tell me, how do you evangelize the illiterate? If you have an answer, please write it in the comments. Things that I didn't accept or were hard to accept. I accepted everything that the church said or says because it's present. So it's not that I never not accepted it. It was more reluctancy to follow. And also I didn't understand them fully, and I had to learn to understand. And I still don't understand everything. I still don't know everything, and that's why this channel is here, for me, to help me learn and grow and to help other people discover the truth. And thankfully I had a good priest for RCIA. And that's the thing, right? People put the church in a box And this box is so small, but the church is so big. It's as big as the universe in terms of everything. And I remember doing my RCIA test, and it was just, it was pretty bad because there's so much to know. There is so much to know. And people believe that they know the church. It's like Blessed Archbishop Fulton Sheen said. Some of the things I had trouble with was the Trinity, because the Mormon teaching was so ingrained in my brain that it was hard for me. I mean, it is still a mystery, right? One God in three persons, but it was very hard for me to get that out of my head, and that's how I understood God to be for so long. I didn't have a problem with confession. I understood why we do it, but it was just hard. It's always hard to push yourself to get there, but then after you do it, it's just such a great blessing. Go to confession. The examination of conscience, to do that every day. I should do it every day. Doing this, going to confession, and doing an examination of conscience, it's the first time I really actually learned about the bad things that I do, that I have trouble with, and that I should work on. Confession is not telling your sins to a priest and the priest forgives you. No, he is in persona Christi. And I will do a confession video. In terms of women being priests, I understood. I had no problem with women not being priests. It was more understanding the role of women in the way that we're actually supposed to be. Just a quick thing on priests and nuns. They're called to a higher calling than you and I who are married. It is difficult to be celibate, and it is difficult to remain a virgin, because they are called to a supernatural life, and that's hard, and we have to pray for them. It is a great sacrifice that they have made so that they can be closer to God. You might think, why is that even important? For example, priests during war would be the ones that go out and either help as doctors, because their priests sometimes they're not just only priests. There are priests that are lawyers, there are priests that are doctors, and at war they would be the ones who would go out and bless the different people, because they wouldn't have a physical family to take care of, unlike pastors who are married. And it's the same with nuns. Whenever someone was hurt, you could rely on them to take care of them, and that is essential. We need that. Their family is all of us. We are their children. Thank you, all priests and nuns and religious and monks, for praying for us, for doing what you do. When did I decide? I can't say I remember exactly, but going to Mass more and more, especially the Latin Mass, you get this understanding that God doesn't speak to us just intellectually, philosophically. He speaks to us through grace that is given to us, either through prayer or just being with Him. That, plus the fact that everything about the church that I learned is true, that everything leads to Rome. I couldn't help but become Catholic. I am only seeking the truth. The truth doesn't care whether I like it or not, whether I agree or disagree, if it makes me feel good or if it makes me feel awful. I am supposed to follow it and then do something about it. I'm like most people. I never had this, vision of Jesus like Paul did, that completely changed my mind and how I lived my life. Even though I knew Jesus and I knew the Catholic Church was true, it still took time. Jesus, the church, is asking us to live in a better way than what we're doing in our lives. And that is so hard in a world that rejects Him so much. Years and years of living one way and then changing is hard in itself. But to change for what he demands of us is even more difficult. That's why I said praying was really hard in the beginning, because it was just, I was trying to intellectualize it, trying to avoid it, and I still do sometimes. And that's bad, but prayer is so important. Spending time with God, with Jesus, is so important. I am still a sinner. And through God's mercy, through God's grace, I was able to find him again in his fullness. And that is the Catholic Church. The Catholic Church is so misunderstood. She deserves to be respected and to be defended and to show the world that what she actually is. There is so much to know about the Catholic Church, and I'm sure I've only touched the tip of the iceberg. And I'm so excited to discover more so that I can know God and serve God and love God more. So yeah, thanks for sitting with me. I hope I got everything out. 2 very long videos, guys. The journey to conversion is a really, really long process. It took me several years. Me getting to know God and his church is a never-ending process. I will have to keep doing it until the day I die. I pray that you will know all the things that the Catholic Church has to offer, and that you will learn of her truths, her beauty, her goodness, and that you may come home. And if you have come home, awesome. Let me know your story in the comment below. Did you have any misconceptions, anything that you struggled with? And if you are a Protestant or any other denomination, please comment below. I would love to hear from you. Why can't you convert? So thank you again for spending time with me. I will see you next time, and God bless.